Welcome to another episode of Startup with Poland, where we take a deep dive into Poland's startup ecosystem and talk to some key movers and shakers. My name is Tessa McIver, and I am your host. Today's guest is Krzysztof Wróbel, founder and CEO at Virbe. This is a startup that creates virtual beings and aims to transform brands' customer service experience to the next level. I decided to invite Chris to the show today, not only because I'm impressed with what I've seen from Virbe so far, but I'll be honest, I'm a bit spooked by the concept of 3D avatars, and I'm hoping that Chris will explain some of the mystery behind them. So hi, Chris.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So, before you tell us all about your virtual beings, and I think we have one with us here today.
One of the many.
Yeah, I want to find out why you decided to become a startup founder and not, I don't know, for example, get a regular corporate job. You know, what's the story behind that choice?
Well, so definitely there is something that, already you raises through your years. And, definitely for me, this was this curiosity. I was always like looking for a change and, being like a young, you obviously have all those ideals, you want to change the world and so on. But then, you get to the point, to the adulthood when the world is not that pleasant anymore. You meet different people, and it was like kind of hit into the wall of my, dreams that, okay, the world is a difficult and chaotic place. So now, if you really want to make a change, you need to do it yourself in a way. So it's really obviously hard if you just follow through like a regular mundane lifestyle. It's like you rather, accept the reality as it is. If you want to make a change, then you need to kind of like get into, probably one of the ways of doing that is getting into entrepreneurship. This is at least something that worked for me. And I think I discovered it pretty late because I think it was when I was 25 years old. When I started my first startup. And it was just like back by accident. You go to the hackathons. I'm a software engineer by training. Okay. So, you go to the hackathons, you discover that there are other people who think like you. And then, you start doing something together. And, now if you are not alone anymore, it's like you have friends to work with. It's kind of like easier to get to this point, to the vision that you have in mind. And basically that's what happened once you've done your first startup, then eventually it followed with the second one. Both of them unfortunately failed, and here we are. So I would say, there was always a drive for change in me, and I really, thrive when I have something to work on, something difficult, something challenging. But then having a team, having a friends, that's definitely something that helps.
Yeah, I'm sure. So third time lucky with Virbe. And tell us, what actually is Virbe? What motivated you to pick this specific, startup? So, obviously I had probably a bit too techy approach to this startup at the beginning because, I used to work for software engineering companies, used to be a developer myself, and, try different frameworks for building applications basically. And I think it was 2018, late 2018, when I kind of like started working on this kind of like virtual being concept. I've seen it somewhere because there were other startups working in this space. And then I thought, actually, this sounds pretty interesting because, we had all those chatbots, they were cumbersome. This is not a very pleasant interface. I'm still not very used to social media. I don't like typing. I prefer, speaking in person with people. And it was like this kind of realization, actually, obviously humans are not enough, they are not enough for us, for most of us all around. In a way, if you really want to think about like optimizing processes and stuff like sales, marketing, and so on, obviously, at some point, you will kind of like hit the limit of how many people you can hire, how many people you can train easily enough to do their job. And obviously, if you want to provide a really good customer service, customer experience in general, then obviously you need to multiply your channels, your interfaces in a way. And I think it was this kind of like, this is what I'm saying, right? I realized through the journey, but initially it was like this kind of like thought that I had in my back, behind my brain. Well, I don't know what's the phrasal for that. Yeah, that's the scratching. The scratching of my brain. That there is something in this. And through the 3 years of running the business, I kind of like discovered what it is all about. And now, namely speaking, it's about like building better interfaces.
because, software developers, they build applications, stuff like this. They use frameworks, for WordPress, for instance, it was like with us for the past 20 years now, like 40% of the internet is built with WordPress. But, in general, that we had mobile apps, now, we have to think about VR, Metaverse, AR, and so on, many new kind of like technologies and channels to operate in. And the thing is, there is a better way. So you don't have to think about like developing interfaces, which are never good enough. So most of the times your customers will be, lost in the process of onboarding or anything like that. We spend hundreds or millions of dollars optimizing those interfaces. But there is an interface that everyone knows and learns since birth. And, we know how to communicate with humans. We also know how to communicate with digital humans. But with digital humans, we can actually scale this almost infinitely through all the channels. And also we have like a control of our customer experience, something which you can't control that well if you have like, your human stuff, especially if it's like an entry-level job, which has a high rate of drop rate, basically, rotation of your employees. And so basically there is still a room for kind of like improving the customer experience in all the channels, basically.
Well, I suppose one of these is not going to have a bad day one day and be grouchy with the customer. So, but
that depends. Because actually, if you want to kind of like code it in a way that if you have like a bad customer, maybe you want to kind of like put him straight. You can do that as well. But it's obviously much more about like having a controlled, pleasant environment for experience for your customers.
I mean, I'm somebody who actually gets really annoyed by, if I want the help of a customer service and a chatbot pops up, or if I have a voice bot calling me with something, I get really angry. And I wonder, how you have dealt with or how you plan to deal with possible negative emotions of, customers who will say, well, I don't want to speak to this. Like, I want a real human being. What is the plan for that situation?
So it's not supposed to substitute humans in general. I would say it's more about like scaling your operations. You still will have humans like guiding and managing the whole process at the end. But it's like, if you think about like this customer support voice line, sometimes you have to wait for 10, 15, 16 minutes. And even if you wait that much, you don't know if your issue will be resolved. So you might have to call multiple times. Isn't it annoying?
Yes, very annoying.
So it's in this sense, AI, and I think the biggest issue by the end of last year was not good enough to create conversational application, conversational interfaces. With the upcoming, with the ChatGPT and all the upcoming large language models, which are now, popping up every week now, this is something which kind of like changes the way we were kind of like building conversational apps, because what used to take months by the team of developers and designers and so on now can be done in a matter of minutes just by providing prompts, your documents, so you can kind of like give the access to your data to the model, and it will kind of like make it a conversational application, conversational interface. And eventually you can, put the finishing touch, the human touch in the loop as well with virtual beings. Yeah.
Well, I'm looking forward to when I first come, in contact with, in a customer relationship and
so
seeing.
You could have already, because we actually piloted it with Żabka Nano a couple months ago, and also in Rossmann.
Okay, I will make sure. I'll find out afterwards from you which stores there, and I'm going to go and test and see if I get angry or not. Chris, I'm really interested in your opinion, slightly changing the flow about the Metaverse, because, we all thought, or at least I had in my mind, that the Metaverse was going to be the next big thing. We would all be all over it. And that doesn't seem to have happened. What is your opinion? Why and which way do you think the Metaverse is going to go?
I think that we still haven't seen the proper Metaverse. And unfortunately, this Metaverse is not the vision that, for instance, Facebook, Meta, has kind of like created. Because I think they created a Metaverse which is kind of like closed in the headset where you hang out with people, but only using your avatar. So I'm a huge believer in this Metaverse in a way being the internet, but done in 3D. Which is something that Jensen from NVIDIA, CEO of NVIDIA, said. So essentially, internet is already a thing, and it's kind of like a tool for us to communicate with each other. And Metaverse, like being the internet in 3D, would mean, okay, now we can actually do it not only through this small smartphone or through your desktop, but we can kind of like be connected almost every time, everywhere, and also in a more expressive manner, meaning we can use 3D visualization, so we can use holograms, stuff like that. And we haven't seen that yet, because this would require, in a way, kind of like augmented reality headset, so let's say glasses or lenses. So we're still, you know, a couple of years, 10 years maybe, before that happening. And I would say that will be the biggest revolution, but a revolution comparable to smartphones. So just, you know, how the society will change if we don't wear it in the pocket anymore, but you kind of like see it all the time, everywhere. Probably, you know, new challenges, pros and cons, you know, but we will see when we get there, right?
Well, I'm interested to see how that develops, and, you know, what the world will look like in 5 years' time. I mean, what do you think in terms of AI, AR, and Virbe? You know, where do you think you're going to be in 5 years' time, if you were to make a prediction, or, you know, your wish list for where you're going to be?
So, you know, 5 years is already expected time to actually exit from your startup. So maybe, perhaps, we'll see. But, you know, realistically speaking, I would say those technologies that you just mentioned, I think they are now well converging with each other, where it's not anymore, and people start to realize that it's not about the technology itself, it's about the utility it provides. And I would say this now is the perfect moment. Obviously, it's a bit chaotic and crazy, because companies still are kind of like now in panic mode, kind of like testing ChatGPT, other LLM models, how to improve their processes, applications, interfaces. And I would say with AI, AR, VR, and so on, now is this moment where we kind of like, okay, so how we need to adapt to that. And I think that's the perfect moment to be with a startup such as this one, because, you know, we provide technology, we provide frameworks, we have an expertise in virtual beings, so we can kind of like be part of this transition for those businesses. And that's why I'm excited, actually, personally, about, you know, both AI and the Metaverse itself, because both those, you know, hyper trends, they kind of like give a lot of possibilities to explore, to, you know, obviously it's not like it's not like we already know everything about like what it is about virtual beings. Actually, we now work with, you know, a couple of companies which want to use this technology to actually do society studies, meaning how do we react to text versus virtual being interfaces? Can it be used in some sort of situation to maybe facilitate the psychological treatment? Because, you know, actually there was already a small research on that. So, you know, sometimes it's really hard to open up after, you know, PT, when for PTSD treatment, stuff like this. And we're having something which is artificial, not too realistic, just to not kind of like mimic humans, but something which is reasonable, so you can talk to it, but you know that it's not human, it's not judging you, and so on. This is something, for instance, which is interesting to explore in terms of like, can it actually help, maybe even on a larger scale, to, you know, for the psychological treatment, education, and so on. So there's actually a lot of areas to explore in terms of, you know, technology such as, you know, AI, ChatGPT, and also virtual beings.
Well, that's a really interesting angle to think that, you know, actually, indeed, you know, I'm sure a lot of people don't go to psychologists because they're a bit embarrassed to share what's, you know, their inside thoughts and problems. But indeed, I suppose if it's not making a judgment, that could, and no, same with education, indeed. So that's a really interesting.
But obviously, it has to be, there has to be oversight. So it's not something just, okay, now we will create virtual psychologists and that's all. Obviously, no. But if it's something which is like an assistant to the psychologist, that's what's interesting.
Yeah. Well, I am fascinated definitely to see what will happen, how this technology will, you know, evolve, and how our lives around it will evolve. So, Chris, thank you so much for coming and for bringing your friends with you and for sharing an insight into Virbe and into the world of AI, AR, VR, etc. It's been really a joy to talk with you.
Yeah, thanks.
And thank you to our listeners. Join us next time for another episode of Startup with Poland.